Welcome to our second lecture, where we will be looking at Hindu art in South Asia. So we'll primarily be in the region of India, Pakistan, Nepal, but note that today's political boundaries are not reflective of the time period that we'll be studying. Even for much of the of today's focus, India comprised of seven different kingdoms. So it was much more complex than what we see today. Speaking of complexity, let me introduce Hinduism. And please note that I am barely skimming the surface and that I am an outsider to it, but this is an extremely complex philosophical system of beliefs. Even labeling it as a religion isn't quite accurate. Labeling it as polytheistic isn't accurate. And so I want to use a story that a student had actually once told me. She was a practicing Hindu. And so we need to consider the concept of Brahman, described as the ultimate reality, the supreme being. But basically all the different gods or forms of gods, etc., are reflections of Brahman, of this ultimate reality, of the supreme being. So what do I mean by that? She described, imagine that you're standing in a pitch dark room. There's no visible light. And in the center of this room is this giant elephant. And there's several people in this room. And so you walk up, it's pitch black, you can't see anything. You put your hand out and you're touching a part of this elephant. Let's say I'm touching the ear. I'm going to describe the ear very differently than someone else who is touching the trunk, compared to someone else who is holding the tail, compared to someone else who is holding or has their hand on his feet, etc. So what this means is that each of those different gods are as if you were putting your hand on a different part of Brahman and you were describing the different aspects of Brahman. So they aren't these separate gods. Instead, they're reflective of Brahman. So they're not like other polytheistic religions we've studied. There's also an extremely wide collection of philosophical literature. So it's not like where other religions have a central text that they look to. There are many in Hinduism. Some are the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras, the Bhagavad Gita, amongst many. So much so there's one text, the Mahabharata, and it is about 6 times the length of the Christian Bible. So this is an extremely complex system of beliefs. There's not a formal conversion, it's not dogmatic. In fact, for Hinduism, they see all religions, all gods, all prophets as again a reflection of Brahman. So it's very accepting. One of the reasons why it spread so quickly and so wide is because it just embraced the gods that were already present in those different areas. That they were considered also a reflection of Brahman. So there was none of this forced conversion. Instead, it was about acceptance, and that they're all reflective of Brahman. There's the concept of dharma, and that's essentially living your life's path, under this belief system that you're doing what you need to do. And I'm very much generalizing here. There's also an element of purification, both in the literal form, before entering temples, etc., performing spiritual acts, but also in the spiritual sense, purifying yourself, of trying to achieve your dharma, of reaching nirvana and exiting the cycle of reincarnation. There's many gods that are reflective of Brahman, but we'll look at least a few of the Trimurti, this trinity. There's Brahma, the creator, not to be confused with Brahman, Vishnu, the sustainer, and Shiva, the destroyer. We'll mostly be looking at some Shiva artworks. Now, to expand on Hinduism, we're going to use Shiva Nataraj as this example to elaborate on some of these concepts. So in Hinduism, we have to understand life as cyclical, both in terms of rebirth, death, and rebirth again. And so you may have heard of the term reincarnation, where you are reborn in different lives, etc. And so this is described as samsara, and it's this cycle of reincarnation. And there's this idea that when you are reincarnated, there's suffering, that each life involves suffering. Especially consider earlier time periods. We're actually pretty recent by comparison with this 11th century bronze, and it's reflective of samsara. We'll discuss that. But so this idea of especially back then, life involved quite a bit of suffering. But you're trying to exit this cycle of suffering. And so you're trying to do your dharma within each lifetime, and this idea of purification in order to reach nirvana, which is the liberation of suffering, where you don't have to go through that cycle of samsara anymore. In Buddhism, this is often referred to as enlightenment, pretty much the same concept. Again, I'm very much generalizing here. Also remember that duality is important across the globe. It's not so that they're polar opposites. We're not focusing on polarity. There's no such thing as good and bad being opposites. Instead, the two are complementary and reflective and happening at the same time. Consider it along the lines of like crying happy tears. And so there's this idea of complementary balance, which is very important. Male and feminine being different, but complementing one another. That they aren't polarities and blocked from interacting. In fact, both are necessary to create this full balance, this full cycle of understanding. And so, let me start with the story of Shiva Nataraj. And this is one of many versions. It's hopefully reflective of the first version that I heard of it. So we have Lord Shiva, and he's out in the woods. And here he is in his dancing form, Nataraj. And so he's doing this wild dancing. And Shiva is often out in the woods. He almost turns like hermit style, where he's dirty. Sometimes he has like ashes on him. He has these dreadlocks. He's taken out. He doesn't have his hair tied anymore. And so he's doing this really wild dance. And so you have these Brahmins, the higher class of the priest society. And they come and they see this crazy homeless-looking guy doing this crazy dance, and they try to stop him. And so they throw this cobra at him. And Shiva doesn't stop his dance. He just grabs that cobra, he wraps it around like a belt, and he keeps dancing. And then they send this dwarf of ignorance toward him to try to stop him. And as we can see, he's stepping on it. So he just continues his dance. And he's moving, and he's grooving. And despite all of these attempts to stop him, he still keeps this tranquil expression, despite the chaos of his own dance and movement, and as well as despite the external forces that are trying to stop him. And so he keeps dancing, and then finally, these priests join him. They realize how happy and at peace he seems. And so there's some of the elements of the iconography we'll study. And this is one of many versions. I could go much more in depth, but I'm generalizing here to introduce some of these concepts. So again, he has this tranquil expression. We see this third eye here, his connection to the spiritual world, a common motif in many religions. He has jewelry, these gauged ears. So this elaborate ornamentation attests to his divinity. He has this crown and headdress upon his head. And we see this sense of movement. Every limb is bent. His body is bent. His hair extends outward in this wild sense of motion. The dreadlocks are splayed out. It's emphasizing his wildness, his movement, his dance. And the arms and legs also reflect this concept of duality. The ways how they're bent, etc., reflect revealing and concealing. Okay, so this is the cosmic dance of creation and destruction. What do I mean by that? Let's focus on the symbolism of the fire, seen on the Torana, this arch of flames, as well as the fire that he's holding, this drum of creation. And so consider how any act of destruction is also an act of creation. Any act of creation is also an act of destruction. Even in the simplest forms where, let's say I wanted to paint something on canvas, I am creating a painting, but I am also destroying. I have destroyed something to make the pigment for the paint, and I've now destroyed the canvas to make this creation. So the two are happening simultaneously. When we come down to the essence of all human beings across the globe, across time, the concept of birth is even important in understanding this. That as you are created, as you exit the womb, there is this sense of destruction as well. And so this is what we all emanate from. We start with destruction and creation. And with this idea of the cyclical reincarnation, this endless cycle of how even though you die, you experience death, you shall be reborn in the next life. So it's this constant cycle. And consider with fire. Fire, if you are creating fire, you are destroying whatever you're burning. If I'm making a fire outside with wood, I am destroying that wood during my creation of fire. So here we have, again, the emphasis on fire to help reveal this story, this concept of the duality of creation and destruction. And so when Shiva is in his Nataraj form, he is practicing this dance of destruction that destroys the universe to recreate the universe. Another story that I like, that I come back to in my head of understanding this, is I once went to a couple times, the redwood forest in California. And so it's these massive trees. And during one of the tours, the park ranger was talking about how in the late 1800s, firefighters stopped a fire from occurring in this redwood forest. They thought they were doing something good. But what's now happened is that the trees have gotten so big that they're blocking light from reaching down to the floor, to themselves, to the other fauna, etc., that's necessary for life in this forest. So by not allowing that natural cycle of destruction, by stopping those wildfires, everything's dying. So destruction is still necessary for creation. That the forest has gone through a cycle of destruction and burning in order for that soil to be regenerated and extremely dense with nutrients in order for these future trees to thrive. And so there's, again, this importance of creation and destruction, and that cycle is necessary. And the balance of the two, the complementary of the two, like with those redwood forests, is they need that destruction in order to thrive and be alive. So let's do an iconographical analysis to continue this idea. So Tirana is this arch of flames, this manifest of the universe, destruction, creation, this cycle of birth and rebirth, this endless cycle of time. Let's also look at the Damaru, this drum of creation. So you hear the beat of this drum, or consider like the thump of a heartbeat, and how that's this cosmic sound, the vibration of creation. You may have heard the concept, this is believed to be the same sound, the vibrational sound of life. In fact, I read somewhere once that the vibration of our planets, the sound mimics. It sounds like, if you're of the Christian tradition, you may say Amen. Amen stems from, again, the same vibrational sound of creation. And then on the other side, the opposite but complementary, is the Agni. And this is the five-pointed divine flame of destruction, which we see again around the Torana. But he's holding these symbols of creation and destruction to reinforce this message to a primarily illiterate people. So they would understand all these symbols and be able to consider and meditate on these ideas in their worship of Shiva. This posture of his left hand pointing down toward his foot with his flat palm is associated with the concept of salvation, and that there's this spiritual grace that he's giving, that this is signifying the attainment of spiritual fulfillment through meditation and mastery over like your primal desires, that you've conquered your base desires in order to achieve nirvana. So he's helping you on this path, in other words. So through worshiping him and following this way, that you'll hopefully be able to achieve nirvana. Let's look at some other iconographical elements. So this cobra it's described as great time, which refers back to reincarnation, the cycle of time. Mudra is the name for symbolic hand gestures, and the position of it is symbolic. And so in this case, we have the Abhaya Mudra right here, and that represents a gesture of comfort and security. It dispels fear. It bestows divine protection and blessings, and so that you're able to experience bliss. Later, we'll see this come back with early Christian art, and where they use specific mudras that were influenced from the Near East. These ideas from India, and so they came from there. Again, he has all this jewelry and the detailed bangles and ornamentation. In this cosmic dance, there's also the element of sound. Consider the bangles that he's wearing that are still popular today. And as he moves, they're jangling on his arms. He has some on his ankles as well. So there's this element of sound as well. He stands upon a parsme. He's this dwarf of ignorance, and that signifies how he's overcoming ignorance as well as temptation. And all of this is upon this lotus pedestal, and that's for rebirth. As well as the lotus symbol is important in many cultures. Consider how it comes from this really mucky mud. And it emerges and blossoms, and there's not a speck of mud on it. But its roots are still in it. It had to go through this difficulty to achieve this pure form. If you go to any bayous in our area or nature preserves, you can compare that to like lily pads, where they emerge from this swampy-like area, this dirty water. And as they are on the surface, there's rarely ever a speck of dirt on them. So this artwork, amongst others, was intended to be used, well, not only would it be housed within a temple, but then on certain holy holidays, it would be part of these processional parades. So this hole on the pedestal is where a pole would go through so that people could carry it. They would be draped in clothing and consider these elaborate flower garlands that would be placed on him. There's sound, there's music, there's the sense of scent right here where you can smell it, you can hear it. And then as part of this coming alive ceremony, which you read about with the ancient Near East, is this sculpture was also given food and milk. And so there's the essence of taste as well, there's incense burning. So all of these appeal to the senses, enable this sculpture to come alive. It's this ceremony. And the intention is for worshippers of Shiva to be able to directly commune with him, and that he would come alive through the sculpture. That's what he was made for. So to elaborate, and it's cool, is that in 2004, a sculpture of Shiva Nataraj, over 6.5 feet tall, was placed outside of CERN in Geneva. And so the description by this Austrian-born American physicist is every subatomic particle not only performs an energy dance, but also is an energy dance. Consider how atoms are always moving and vibrating. A pulsating process of creation and destruction. For the modern physicist, Shiva's dance is the dance of subatomic matter. And in Hindu mythology, it is a continual dance of creation and destruction, involving the whole cosmos, the basis of all existence and of all natural phenomena. And like I said in yesterday's lecture, if you'll remember, Oppenheimer, he was very familiar with these concepts and could read Sanskrit, etc. And so the idea of destruction and creation and essentially atomic energy, the vibration of these atoms and the destructive and creative forces that are associated with it in many ways, is reflective of Shiva. And so here we have Shiva as Lord of the Dance to help us understand Hinduism and just how complex the art is. There are more items of iconographical analysis we could study with this artwork. And so we're going to see this throughout today's lecture. Now let's talk about the figure style. Notice how the figure style is extremely rounded. We don't have these muscular figures that we may have seen or that we can think of with previous units. He does have broad shoulders, but our focus is on the concept here, is on the message, the very multifaceted philosophical message here, in which you could consider and think about all of these concepts as you're engaging with this sculpture. Now let's talk about some caves, the Elephanta caves. So here we have the Elephanta caves on this island. Now if we think back even to prehistoric times, caves are important. And yeah, the same goes for the modern era. If you were to walk into a cave, even with no religious beliefs, it's still a cool and unique experience. There's this element of being present, feeling like you're in this otherworldly space. And so this is utilized for religious structures in Hinduism and Buddhism. And here we have these caves, which are carved into the caves. This is the plan of it. We'll briefly look at the central linga, in which it's the center of this temple, and head over to the first cave, and look at our Sadashiva. So here we are walking in. This is the central area. And we're looking, here's the shrine, and it's enclosed by these guardian figures. So come back to the other instances where we've studied guardian figures who are protecting this sacred space from both seen and unseen negative or evil forces. Much of it has been reconstructed. And what we're looking at is the concept of the linga and the yoni. It has this phallic element of it because what it's representing is the unification of the male and female at the cosmic level. So come back to that idea of balance, and that destruction and creation may seem like they're polar opposites, but essentially both are happening at the same time. That they're not on this idea of polarity or this linear line, that instead it's this cycle and simultaneous. And so when it comes to the ideas of male and female, is that both may seem on these polar opposites, but they're in fact complementary, that both are needed for the creation of life. An important element to consider is that for much of time, there were people didn't live very long, high infant mortality rates, and so there is this emphasis on procreation, on life, etc. And anyway, so we come back to that idea of balance here, that this isn't meant to be this phallic sexual representation. It's instead supposed to represent this balance, this cosmic balance of male and female. Let's head over to our Sadashiva, our High Trimurti Sadashiva. And so there's a lot of different information about it. Originally, it was considered to be our 3 Trinity gods. Then it had changed, and for the most part, now it's recognized as being Sadashiva. And what this is reflective of the 5 faces, the 5 cosmic forces of Shiva. We don't have to know all 5, but I want you to come back to our cylinder seal from Mohenjo-Daro, and that this imagery is 4,000 years old. Okay, we're looking at this 3-headed God. Center, right, left. And so here we have 3 of the 5. Okay. We have on the left the Agora Shiva, the fearsome destroyer. Central is our Tatpurusha Mahadeva, divine energy preserver. And on the right is our Vamadeva, this blissful creator association. And I'm generalizing these extremely complex concepts here. All of this page is on your handout, so you have it in front of you, because I know it's a lot. There are 2 other heads, because we're seeing the 5 factors of Shiva in many different forms, multifaceted. Anyway, so one head would be behind them, facing the wall, and the other head is facing upward. So let's look at the left side here. This is Shiva in his fearsome destroyer form. He's much more masculine. He is supposed to look ferocious. He has this twisted mustache. He's frowning. Within his hair, we have these skulls and these snakes, and his hair is really matted. He also has snake earrings, these cobras. And in fact, he's actually holding and scrutinizing the head of a cobra. So he's in his very fearsome, destructive force. Come back to our Shiva Nataraj and this dance of destruction and creation. But reflective here, it was primarily focusing on the destructive forces. Here is our central figure, and where this is reflective of his divine energy, this concept of the preserver to an extent. It's much more calm, it's welcoming. He looks balanced and detached in this state of meditation. So it's in between the preserver. On the far right is our creator, this blissful creator. And it's much more masculine. So again, this balance of masculine and feminine. The figure style is much more rounded to reflect that. There's also these soft curls. It's more decorative with this jewelry. And this soft, sweet-tempered smile, holding a lotus flower. So here we have the Sadashiva, these 3 of the 5. So we're going to look to the right of this relief for a moment and talk about our Gangadhara with Shiva and Parvati. So in this cycle of reincarnation, we need to consider, again, this masculine and this feminine energy, and that the two are always drawn toward one another for balance. Now, within each of Shiva's lives, he's always looking for his consort Parvati, and she is also looking for him. And they're in different forms, and sometimes they can't be together, and sometimes they can. But it's this constant cycle of them trying to embrace one another for this cosmic balance, of this male and female energy finding one another to create balance, reflective of life and duality. And so here we see Shiva and his consort Parvati, and how they are bending in this opposite form. In terms of figure style in Hindu art, the females will be smaller than the males to show the difference between male and female. They're both in this rounded style. He does have the broader shoulders to show his masculinity. And I want to introduce a term called tribinga. I will mostly refer to it as like an S-curve, this 3-bend curve. So it's at the neck, the waist, and the knee. Comparable to our contrapposto pose of ancient Greece, but with more of a bend, also called the S-curve. There's also this sense of hierarchy of scale. These are gods. Surrounding them are other figures that aren't nearly as important. Now above him is the iconography for the Ganges River. And this is an extremely important river in Hinduism, especially related to purification. And so here is the goddess form of that. And she must go through the hair of Shiva as part of this creation story to an extent. On the other side of our Sadashiva is Shiva and Parvati as one. So the two are combined into one. They have found that balance. They've come together. We see that because there's 2 arms, and the headdress and crown are mixed. And also, if you look at her chest, there's his or her chest that one side has a breast, one side does not. Again, to indicate that they've come together. They've found each other. There's this sense of balance in the cosmos. Let's talk about the Hindu temples in terms of the regional differences. So we have the Nagara style in northern India, something in, versus the Dravida style in southern India. And so they're both related to this idea of a mountain emerging. In fact, I forgot to mention, our Shiva, the height of it is also reflective of a mountain. Remember, the Himalayas are to the north, amongst other. And I mean, across the globe, there's this sacred association with mountain ranges. So again, coming back to the Shikaras, are this higher part, and it's supposed to represent, again, the highest mountain. And the Nagara style will have multiples of these. One may be larger, but will have multiple. Whereas with the Dravida, there's one focus on one Shikara. The Nagara is more curved linear in shape, versus the Dravida is much more of this pyramid shape. I think of like this step pyramid. There's not so much of an emphasis on the boundaries of the temple with the Nagara compared to the Dravida. They'll have a surrounding thick wall. So the boundaries are given high importance. And with the Nagara style, there's the temple itself is actually on a plinth. So think back to like almost comparable to our Greek stylobates. So it's above the ground, whereas pedestals are at the ground level. Like there's not much of a difference with the Dravida. The main focus of the deities, the sculptures, are within the temple of the Nagara, versus the Dravida, they're also found outside of it. So let's look at an example of our Dravida style. We're in southern industry with the Chola dynasty. And this style it's made out of granite. We're actually looking at, it was added on expanded over an extended period of time. But it originated in the 9th century. And as you can see, they're much more pyramidal in shape. Okay, the boundaries are clearly defined by this thick wall. They're close to the ground, and there's sculptural deities throughout it. These are the gopurams. These are the gateway towers. So these aren't the temples themselves. So this focus. And notice how there's this real sense of the horizontal here versus our more vertical sense of our Nagara style. What's really interesting is in Europe at this time, we start to have the emergence of our Romanesque and Gothic, and they too have this sense of the horizontal versus the vertical. So just interesting. This was made during the Chandela dynasty. You won't have to know those. And this is the Lakshmana temple, which is dedicated to the goddess Lakshmi, the Lord Vishnu. However, within the main chamber, we do have the Lord Vishnu. So the two aren't separate. They're one and the same of balancing each other out. As you can see, we do have this slight wall, but there's not this exterior thick wall to define the temple boundaries. Here's an aerial view plan. So again, our Nagara style, we have these multiple sense of this mountain range, more curvilinear, high off the ground. The deities are found more within. Okay, this is the actual temple, where we have these other examples of the Sakara element, but these are actually just, the mandapa refers to, these are porches, they're covered porches. Here's our plinth. Okay. Some new words is the Vamana, which is a shrine found within the womb chamber. So what do I mean by that? If you come back to, think back to like the Pantheon and the Greek elements of a temple and how you would enter the cella to commune with the patron deity of this temple. Similar concept here, where the womb chamber would house the main god that you were trying to commune with. So here's our visual comparison. You can see the difference. Again, this more vertical element of the Nagara versus the more horizontal emphasis of the Dravida. So an important concept to understand with many religions is circumambulation. And so circum means round, ambulation means to walk. And so you walk around. In the early Christian churches, prior to Protestantism, you would walk around the church, stopping at the different niches, etc., to pray and consider. And within Islam, at the Kaaba, which we'll discuss, is you circumambulate around the Kaaba, the most important center of Islam. You would circumambulate 7 times. And so there's also the idea of circumambulation within Hinduism and in the temples. And so this is essentially, if you want to consider the commonality, it's a meditative act. Is that you're walking, you're considering. For our body, my mind's gone blank. Physically, walking is the best thing you can do for your body. We are bipedal human beings. We are meant to walk. And so this is also good for your health if you consider it that way. And so there is this innate need for us to walk and circumambulate, and that this is both good for our spiritual health and our physical health. And so this practice, you would walk in this clockwise direction. Not only could you walk around the temple itself, but as you enter, there are multi-levels. And you're walking in this clockwise direction around. And where you're ultimately going on this circumambulation, a clockwise journey to enter the womb chamber. And throughout this journey, you're meditating, as you're considering the journey, the stories that are told on these narrative friezes. You're considering the patron deity, the main deity who you're going to be seeing in the womb chamber. And you're reflecting upon your journey toward that deity, on your path of your dharma, etc., of your purpose for life. And so here, we're on this plinth, or we see this plinth, where we have this narrative frieze in which you're considering as you circumambulate around this temple. So you would walk up to the temple from the east, and you would walk around it in this clockwise direction, and then enter into the actual temple part and walk around it in a clockwise direction as you move upward toward our womb chamber. So here are these sculpted friezes. They depict images of daily life, of love, of war. Again, seem like polar opposites, but this sense of duality is always present, as well as historical events of the Chandala period of this dynasty. So, yes, this is a religious structure, but like any major structure we've studied, it's also political, because the Chandala dynasty is showing off their wealth, and they're also showing that they're taking care of the people, that they are providing them with this beautiful temple structure in which they may worship these Hindu deities. So, garners favor from the people. So you're considering these sculpted friezes. You're reading the stories in the figural form. And here is Ganesh. So as you would walk up one of the set of stairs, here's one of the sculptures that you would see in this niche. It's housed in this temple-like structure. And the story, Ganesha is often associated with the beginning of journeys. And he, the remover of obstacles on your journey. So consider how he's the remover of obstacles on your dharma of that life journey, or on your journey toward nirvana. He's helping you remove those obstacles. When I was in Nepal, in all the taxi driver cars, they always had a statue of Ganesh, where that was supposed to represent removing the obstacles on their car journey. And so he is still worshipped today in modern forms as well. So the story of Ganesh, just for fun, is he's the son of Shiva and Parvati. And so she had prayed to have a son. And she was in the bath one day, and Shiva was out hunting. And out emerged this young child, and not toddler. I kind of think along the ages of like 7 to 10-ish. And here's a version of the story. Anyway, so he's fully formed. And she's so excited. She finally has the son whom she'd prayed for. And this is in one of their reincarnations. And so, again, Shiva is out hunting. Ganesh has not met his father yet, but he hears someone trying to enter the door. His mom is still in the bath. And so he goes to the door, and there's this strange man that is trying to enter. And this strange man gets very upset that there is a young boy blocking his way into the house. And so Ganesh tries to stop this strange man from entering, and they're both forceful with one another. Things get physical, and Shiva ends up chopping off the head of Ganesh. Of course, by this time, Parvati runs out. She sees her son is decapitated, and she's sobbing and tells him the story, and he realizes that he has killed their son, given to them by the gods. And so he says that he'll go out and he will find a new head for this for Ganesha. And the first thing that he sees, the first creature, and he sees an elephant. And so he cuts off the elephant's head, brings it back, and so this becomes Ganesha's head. And so that's why he always has this elephant head. And think of how elephants are strong, they remove obstacles. They were helped with construction during this time period, etc. And so he's the remover of obstacles, the son of Shiva and Parvati. And here we are, where you are told as the devotee circumambulating around this temple, that you're on the right path. Here's an example again of this S-curve. We see these males, these females, and this constant idea of the two finding one another. Within each reincarnation, they're finding their consort. And this is this cosmic divine union. It's this sense of balance in every sense of the term, both, of course, in the physical procreation during a high death rate, but also on the cosmic balance of achieving your balance, of being able to exit samsara to achieve nirvana. This temple is also known for these kind of explicit, erotic couples. But again, this isn't meant to be pornographic. They're not. It's shocking, perhaps from a Western perspective, but it's supposed to emphasize this sense of balance. The Trimurti gods, amongst the others, they all have their consorts that they're constantly searching for balance. Brahma and Saraswati, Vishnu and Lakshmi, Shiva and Parvati. So it's about this cosmic balance. Some historians do argue that it also is encouraging procreation pretty explicitly, and this was done because there was some type of population decline that occurred, be it from, I can't remember whether it was warfare, I think it was more of like some type of plague had wiped through. So come back to Augustus, where he's showing imagery to encourage procreation, to repopulate. And so an argument is that this is explicitly done here to encourage repopulation. But again, this idea of balance is always coming through when there's a male and female sculptural image. So you're walking around and you're going to be entering the last set of stairs into the actual temple, into our womb chamber. And so inside this womb chamber, you're entering this completely different state, that it's this really spiritual, dimly lit, hardly any light in windows, of this entering this extremely sacred space. You're already in this state of meditation because you've been meditatively walking and considering, and this whole journey is reflective of your journey toward achieving nirvana, of your journey of doing your dharma for this lifetime, doing what you're supposed to do in order to move up in the next lifetime, etc. And so here you are, where you've reached this journey where the idea is that your ultimate goal is to reach nirvana, and so that you are communing with the gods, that you aren't a part of this earthly cycle, that instead you can move back into the supreme deity, this cosmic form in which you're communing here with Vishnu. Here he is again in his three-headed form, central, left and right, which we've seen time and time again. And so here's your culmination of this journey. And that is our Lakshmana temple. If we consider to what we've studied before, this temple, as well as with our Greek temples that we've studied, these aren't places where congregations go to. They don't congregate together. Unlike, think of any of the Abrahamic traditions where they regularly congregate and worship on a particular day and listen to a speaker. That isn't the case here, where they're just entering to commune with the gods on their own personal spiritual path here. The interior room houses a revered icon. There's sculptural friezes to help communicate complex ideas, and they reflect the glory and growing power of their builders. So it's both political and religious. And there is our end to Hindu art in South Asia.